Well, still back to the issue of the LPG marketers indicating that they will not reopen their centers. Of course, the group has been indicating to Joy News this afternoon that some $10 million was invested into the construction of new stations before the ban by the NPP government in 2017, freezing all constructions of LPG centers. President of the association, Gabriel Kumi, tells Joy News any further decision to delay the reversal on the ban against the construction of new LPG stations will kill the industry. He adds that government's impending cylinder recirculation model may affect local marketers.
Main issue bothering and confronting all these associations is the $10 million that our members have sunk on the ground in the name of constructing LPG stations that a ban has been placed on. For the past 5 years, we are not able to finish these projects and recoup the investment made in them so we can repay the loans we've taken from the bank. We had been given various permits over the years, and we have started construction. And we have sunk a lot of borrowed funds into these projects. So allow us to complete those ones, so that if you issue instruction to MPA to say that, look, from today, don't issue any new permit to anybody to construct LPG station in Ghana, we go by that. But those that we have been given permit by fire permit, EPA permit, MPA no objection permit, MPA construction permit, and all that, and we have begun construction, please give us that leeway so that we'll be able to construct those stations so we can recoup the investment and repay our loans to the bank. And my brother, we've been fighting this for 5 good years. We don't seem to achieve any results. For a businessman in this era of COVID-19 and Russia-Ukraine war, in this difficult time, for a businessman to wake up in the morning and say, I'm locking up my business, that fits me. It tells you that something big is chasing that person. And that is where we've gotten to now. We didn't have to get here. We have written letters to the ministries, to MPA, and even to cabinet to consider indigenous Ghanaians who have invested $10 million on the ground. Where is our support for the private sector that we always talk about? LPG is the only industry in Ghana that has 100% local content in terms of participation. The LPG downstream is 100%. Now in Ghana, even Kelewele selling and Bayayachi is being taken over by Chinese. We cannot go to cabinet to spill our grievances. We can only do that through our regulator like MPA and then through the ministry. If these people are presented what they need to present and it's not being adhered to, maybe government is not understanding the magnitude of the situation. So maybe such actions, when the general public began to speak, government will listen to us.
So what do you think is causing the reluctance on the part of cabinet to listen?
Your guess, I don't know. I can't tell that you have your indigents. You have a local industry like the LPG downstream industry, made up of indigenous Ghanaians, 100%. The LPG industry in Ghana has been built by indigenous Ghanaians. When we started LPG in Ghana, the foreign companies like the Totals and the Shells were involved. They all chickened out because of the sensitive nature of the product, because of the difficulty in trying to market and distribute that product. It took the ordinary Ghanaian to stand tall, and we have built the industry over the past 25 years to where it is today. So as to why cabinet doesn't want to, we understand government wants to introduce a new policy, cylinder recirculation policy. That is why all these things is going on. But you don't destroy your existing industry just because you have the intention of introducing a new one. How sure are you the new one you are going to introduce will succeed or will fail? You have a bird in hand. You have an industry that employs about 7,000 direct labor, 7,000 Ghanaians. So even if you have an intention to introduce a new one, must you destroy the existing one? Now consumption of LPG is on the decline.
So when are you reopening the stations?
It's an indefinite strike that we are embarked on, not until we get something positive from. This is a legitimate demand. I'm sure you are convinced, that the way you are nodding, you're convinced that we are making a very legitimate demand.
So the signs are clear, reasons for which if you show up at any of the LPG stations, you may not have that service provided to you. But I want to bring in now Edward Barr, Member of Parliament's Mines and Energy Committee. Also, the issue about safety. Nana Yao Akwada is Executive Director of the Bureau of Public Safety. Nana Yao, let me start off with you. The reason for which, obviously, we learnt of that cylinder recirculation model and also the directive asking LPG centres not to reopen is simply because of safety. But here we have 7,000 jobs on the line. Should that be equally of concern to us? And Naya, if you could unmute for me so I can hear the points you're making.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. Let me say good afternoon to Ghanaians. I think that it's important that we put something in good perspective. The decision to halt construction of filling stations came on as a result of the atomic junction disaster. And then the considerations were largely due to safety issues. And then it moved on from there into the discussion on cylinder recirculation module. So our understanding at the Bureau of Public Safety was that due to the numerous safety issues that, came along with these filling stations operating and they not complying to safety, regulations and all. If we have the cylinder recirculation module, obviously a less riskier, relatively less riskier framework to let the public gain access to LPG for whatever purposes, it would have been great. Our disturbance now is how come 5 years on, there seems to be very little engagement with these, let me call them critical stakeholders, to the extent that they will from nowhere, embark on an indefinite strike action, ostensibly to get government, take action on the ban on construction of these filling stations. I think it is very unfortunate that 5 years on, we've come to this position, if that is the case. And then secondly, as for issues of employment, I think it's not a zero-sum game. It's a 50-50. If we are successful to migrate from the current system of having filling stations listed across the country, some of them in some very weird places, applying very poor safety measures. And we have demonstrated as a country, as a state, that the resource that we need to enforce safety at workplaces is very, very minimal. So moving to the CRM would have been great. But when we move to CRM, these tanker drivers and all these marketing association members are the same people who are going to operate or engage citizens in the industry. So the issues about jobs, loss of jobs, I think is neither here nor there. Our worry is the fact that governance is by engagement. Yep. What sort of engagement has gone on in the last 5 years? In fact, only 2019, I was in a session where the MPA boss, Dr. This fair colored friend of mine, indicated that in 2020, CRM was going to take off. We are past half of 2022. We are past half of 2022. And here we are faced with, an indefinite strike action, which will definitely distort, people's businesses and domestic activities.
There's a need for us to find that fine balance at this point. And this is where I also want to bring in Edward Barr, who's been on with us as well, monitoring the perspectives you're bringing on board. So you're a member of the Mines and Energy Committee. I'm sure that you're between a rock and a hard place now. The issue about finding that fine balance between safety and the issue about jobs. Nana Akwada believes, let's try and find a good balance. Where do you see all of these things from? I mean, what's your perspective on it?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I think that basically it is very, very clear that as a country, we needed to take some actions when it comes to the issue of how we made LPG accessible to the citizens. In doing that, we needed to ensure that people's lives were protected, particularly in the face of what happened in the atomic junction issue. You know that before that there were other serious challenges with regard to fire outbreaks that were associated with dispensing LPG to customers. And so it was very clear. I think that government in itself, at the early stages, came out in reaction to what the public sentiments came out with, how do you call it again? The cabinet decision to first ban altogether, the construction of new ones. What government never took cognizance of, and I listened to the gentleman, and we have raised this many times with MP, that people had already gone for loans. People had already invested that. They had gotten all the necessary permits. And suddenly you banned them. And there was no alternative arrangement to ensure that these people's their investments were protected. Whilst you try to move them into a more safety way of trying to dispense LPG. You never did that. That's the first point. Two, the state has spent so much money. And indeed, I'll tell you, the committees that had been put in place by NPA, there were one time, one of them, and a group, when they were going to Colombia, since I was traveling, while they were also traveling, they had traveled to Senegal, they had traveled to Cote d'Ivoire, they had traveled to India, they had traveled to Peru, they had traveled to a number of countries to just learn the experience of that, to implement it. What I find very surprising is why after 5 solid years, we seem not to have made a breakthrough in trying to implement the CRM. That is my challenge.
So help us with a solution then. What's the position of the minority side on this? Do we rebate the persons who've made investments and then roll out the recirculation model? What do you suggest as that solution?
Let me tell you something. You see, I'm going to introduce something, but normally when you introduce it, you want to ensure that somebody is there to rebut it and give the person a fair chance to rebut that. But I think that part of the process has been engulfed in self-seeking initiatives. People wanting to have a bite in the industry because they see that this is a gold mine that they could take a bite in there. And so try to make sure that how do we become key players in that? And therefore tend to frustrate in a way even what the implementation of the whole process.
Are you being fair to government by the points that you're making? There's no evidence to suggest that.
That is why. Let me tell you. You see, besides the fact that I've been a member of the Mines and Energy Committee for 7 years now, I had worked in that industry for almost a decade. And so when I speak because of the fact that I have people within the system. And we have had situations where we have tried to question them as to the delay in some of these things. Look, my brother, I believe that you recall there's this Togbe, I'm told he's dead now, who went to court. They were represented by Professor Tuguba and Associates, their law firm in court, fighting the MPA about the fact that their investments were at risk, the fact that they could not, even their workers were going to lose their jobs, the fact that even in terms of the whole government policy of ensuring that we have at least 50% penetration of LPG in terms of usage. You know that as we're speaking, out of about 30 million Ghanaians, only 7.5 million Ghanaians really use LPG. The essence for introducing LPG into our system was, one, to improve on health, because people were relying on wood fuel. And because they were relying on wood fuel, and wood fuel brings out carbon monoxide, it was injurious to the health of mostly our mothers and wives and then daughters, because they were in the kitchens. And two, it was also a threat to our environmental issues because a lot of trees were being used in trying to get a charcoal and what have you. So if in bringing a new policy you must ensure that the original underpinning principles under which those policies were introduced are not sacrificed. Now, what we have is that we have a situation where, in an attempt to improve on our efficiency in serving the public with LPG, we have made people's investments to go off. A lot of people have lost jobs. People have had their properties, because sometimes when you go to, for example, to go and secure a loan, maybe you can guarantee with your property and other things, isn't it?
Right.
People have lost their properties by virtue of the guarantee system that we have in our banking system. And so I'm just making the point that clearly the actions of the three unions, that is the Liquefied Petroleum Gas Marketers Association, the LPG Operators Association, and the Tanker Drivers Association, these three unions, I believe their actions are just to draw attention of the public about the manner in which government is handling this issue. I have heard from MPA to MPA boss to MPA boss. I heard Asan Atampuli, both before the Mines and Energy Committee and the general public, give us timelines that they were going to ensure that this thing was fully implemented. I've heard Dr. Mustafa Amin also make the same promises. Time and again, we have had these timelines not being met. And so the people are frustrated. And the only thing they can do is to withdraw their services so that Ghanaians, now if I go to buy LPG and I can't get it at the outlets, I will definitely get frustrated and I'll ask, why is it so? And their government will be forced to give answers. I just hope that this thing brings some solutions to it.
Right. Nanaya, what do you think? Do we expand rebates, the LPG marketers, and start the recirculation model? What's your approach in solving this problem?
Well, I'll tell you just in very simple terms. I think that government should engage. Like you said, we need to draw a fine balance between safety and, economics. Government must engage, but the mere fact that it's been 5 years and we are still having to deal with an indefinite strike today in Ghana, it demonstrates that government has not shown enough good faith to, industry players. Government has not shown concern, and government has also not been consistent in its own approach. Honorable Bawa did mention that in our quest to go CRM, we have made a lot of investments as a country. Indeed, I want to corroborate that we have sent teams and teams of people across the globe, just to go learn the ups and downs, the best of the best to bring to Ghana. And if 5 years on, we are still having, this is almost like we are now about to take off, then it's problematic. And so immediately government must engage these stakeholders who are literally holding society, hijack.
What do you suspect?
Bring some sanity to the space.
Right. What do you suspect to be the problem? At least we've heard from Edward Barr saying, well, some persons out there want to have a bite in the market. What's your diagnosis of the problem too?
Well, I think it's Ghana. You don't need to do any research or need to be neck deep in how our system operates to learn that there are people who want to individually hijack the process or profit from the process. And so some way, somehow, a government intention about to roll out with the best of intention to secure the society and to create jobs and opportunities. Maybe a few people want to hijack the system or hijack the process to, profit off it. And thus, we are in the quagmire that we find ourselves. But I think that with immediate effect, government must engage these stakeholders to make sure that they restore sanity. It is not a good image on the government that for 5 years on, we are still where we are. When even we know the path is clear, we know that cylinder recirculation is the way to go, and we still have all these people coming up. There are several ways that those people who have invested money in their facilities can be sorted out. Several ways. Apart from conducting audits these spaces to ensure that they are properly sited, they meet all the safety protocols, and they have the requisite human resource to govern the space. We can also locate them and say, from where you are located, you cannot, produce or sell, but we will have to go into the recirculation model, and that your facility will be licensed for the recirculation model. Your facility will be licensed to produce gas. And there are several ways that the government could go about this. And I believe that if the government really, really opens up to engage, we should be able to restore the kind of sanity that is required.
And so for the Bureau of Public Safety, when is that appropriate time to roll out the cylinder recirculation model? The concerns are, now that we have all the LPG stations shutting down, government should consider fast-tracking the process. But that would definitely not happen without stakeholder consultation. So what should be the timeline now? Do we revise it?
Absolutely. If I understand your question well, government will need to do some revision, because the CRM has not been piloted on a wider scale. At best, I heard the current MPA boss mention that it was piloted somewhere in the central region, but that's just one region. So we'll definitely need to review our timeline, but we must engage with these members who are on strike to resume service as soon as possible, while we give them a roadmap to auditing and seeing which facilities that have been stopped from continuing with their construction, and which ones government will need to pay them off or whatever, or convert the facilities into CRM depots and stuff like that. Government will definitely have to engage. That is governance. You can't do governance without any serious engagement. And to sit around for 5 years without engaging for us to come here, I think that's a dent on the competence of the people who manage the space, unfortunately.
Let me bring in Edward at this point. From your side, on the minority side in Parliament, what are we likely to see from you? The House, unfortunately, is not sitting, but from the committee perspective, are you likely to intervene, and what steps will you take?
I believe that today we issued a statement that was signed by our ranking member, calling on government, and particularly the president and cabinet, because this was a cabinet decision, to review their position and see what are the bottlenecks that are affecting the full implementation of this model.
What revision? I'm sorry, but what revision are you asking for? A revision of the timeline of the implementation?
Basically, because they have, for now, all timelines they've given us have never been met. And so it is important that, and you recall that cabinet had mandated MPA to do that. If MPA is not delivering on the mandate given to them, it is important that the group that engaged MPA, in this case cabinet, should take a second look and review and see what are the reasons why this particular model is not being fully implemented. That's one aspect. Two, I think that MPA itself must also begin, just like my colleague said, engage these 3 unions. It is important that they engage them to begin to start talking. I believe that when the people begin to see that there is some level of clarity and as to where they are going and how they are getting there, they may really be able to understand and work with government and for that matter MPA to have a full implementation of the CRM. Last but not the least, I think that, and that we have also included in our statement, that the unfortunate victim in all these Kapudu is a Ghanaian. Is a Ghanaian who will have to go and buy LPG to cook in the house. There are a lot of people who do not even have coal pots again. And so the fact that the person does not have access to gas is going to just disrupt the activities in their domestic settings. And so we are also appealing to the association to also temper justice with mercy and see how they can work quickly to restore their services, because
so you equally want the gas stations reopen immediately as well?
My brother, that's very true. As I speak to you now, I'm just praying that nobody calls me and tells me that the gas is finished and I have no gas. I just hope that nobody tells me that. And so it means that, and I believe this is a problem that will be encountered by almost every family. And so that's what I'm also appealing to the associations that in as much as we sympathize with them, we understand the challenges they are going through, but we also do know that we as Ghanaians, we are the innocent victims in this case. So yes, they have made their point, but they should see how they could come on board to ensure that the services are restored. Again, but more importantly, MPA as a matter of agency should be able to call these the leaders of these associations to engage them and give them a clear and implementable, timelines that will be acceptable to all of them.
And it's good you're talking about the NPA because we know that the CEO has been engaging your committee. The last time you engaged the NPA on this matter, what timelines did they give? And are they in default of that timeline, or have they still maintained the period?
They have been in default. Let me tell you, for 2021, they had indicated that they were going to, as part of the activities, one area I remember very clearly was that they were going to do 3 other pilot projects.
Right.
In Volta, I think, and some 2 other regions. They were going to do that as part of the activities towards the full implementation of the CRM. My brother, when they came, that activity had not been done. I personally asked why those activities have not been done. NPA's response to me was that they revised that particular strategy and to look at something else that will hasten their full implementation of the CRM. And so they themselves, I believe that we do not also have some certainty in the strategy they are employing to implement the mandate given to them. And so cabinet must be seen to be a bit more responsible. The Ministry of Energy must be responsible in ensuring that these people do their work very well. And most often than not, we seem not to be seen to be doing this until we are held by, excuse my language, about the nuts for us to now know that, look, it is dangerous now to take people for granted. I just hope and pray that all the key stakeholders, government, NPA, which is the regulator, and the associations, they sit down and judge and then find a clear path towards the resolution of this challenge, because the Ghanaian is the ultimate sufferer.
Right. But for you, Nanayo Akwada, the point about the pilots, you had some issues with it. Why is it so important that we do so? Some would say we've rolled out the pilot basis, at least in one region. The cylinder recirculation model has been tried and tested in some other countries. So why the need to still wait for more pilots, processes to be complete before we go ahead with that, rollout of the policy?
Well, our society is quite diverse. It's very, very diverse. And if you want to implement a policy in a country like Ghana with such diverse society, you don't just choose one region, like a central region, which is not as diverse as, say, a place like Greater Accra.
Right.
You should be looking at a place like maybe Greater Accra, maybe Western region somewhere in Takoradi, with a much more diverse, population to do such pilots. I don't know what informed their choice of central region, but I think that if you choose central region to run a pilot, you are most certainly likely to run into problems if you go nationwide. You must run your pilot programs in a place where you have a good grasp of how Ghanaians will respond to it, how the business, even the industry players are even going to apply themselves to the job and all. So it's very, very important that if they've learned any lessons from central region and they think they are confident enough to go countrywide, they can bring it on. But currently, we need to deal with the ongoing strike, nip it in the bud before we move ahead. I think that government must demonstrate some consistency and good faith in this direction.
And I'm grateful so much that you've been able to join us on the polls. Let me wrap up with you, Edward Barr, your final words, and perhaps you have a message from your colleagues in Parliament to the sector minister. What will that message be?
The message basically would be that, look, the minister must take charge of this thing. I know that this thing was initiated before his appointment as a Minister for Energy, but he must take full because he has a superintendent role over MPA, so he must take charge of that. Two, I think that the NPA, as I said, I don't know how many times I will want to stress this. NPA must immediately engage the associations. That is the second point. And three, if they think that they are really sincere, and because all Ghanaians really supported them when it comes to the issue of the implementation of the CRM.
Right.
We all support that. The idea is good. They must be honest, transparent, and ensure that the basic principle that underlines all the activities towards the full implementation of that is the Ghanaian and not self-seeking interest. That is what we should be looking at. And that's the advice I'll give to the operators within the sector.
Probably you know much than I do about the issue of the self-interest, but we'll have to leave it here. Thank you so much, Edward Barr, for your time here on The Pulse. You're still with us on the Joy News channel. We'll return and bring you some more stories. Please stay.